The horse stumbled once, hooves slipping on the slick, snow-covered rock, and Silas Cohen pulled the reins hard, steadying the gelding with a low, guttural curse. Wind howled down from the mesas like it had a personal grudge biting through his coat, turning the edges of his breath to frost. The sky had fallen into gray, and the land around him had vanished beneath a thick sheet of white. He could barely see the canyon rim anymore, just the twisting trail ahead, and the wide, ghost-colored hush of winter trying to swallow it all whole. He'd meant to be farther south by now. Away from the storm, away from towns with names he couldn't remember, away from the memory that still found him even in his sleep, Eleanor gone in blood and silence, and the child he'd never held. Silas leaned forward, muttering to the horse. Just a little farther, Copper. We find a place to camp, then we ride again at dawn. He didn't expect an answer. Copper was just another soul too tired to protest. Like him. Then he heard it. A sound that cut through the wind, like a blade, thin, ragged, not the cry of any animal. A child. He froze, reins clutched tight, listening again. Nothing but wind at first. Then there. A broken, desperate sob swallowed by the cold. He turned in the saddle, peering through the swirling snow. Just beyond a gnarled juniper, the sound rose again, closer, now sharper. Help, please, Silas swore under his breath. He didn't stop for people. Not anymore. Stopping meant trouble. Stopping meant entanglements. He had rules. But the crying, damn it. He dismounted and pushed through the snow, hand hovering near his revolver, heart knocking hard in his chest for reasons he didn't understand. He crested a small ridge and stopped cold. She was no more than 8. Tiny, bone-thin, dressed in a patched linen dress that might have been white once. Her arms were wrapped around herself, shaking violently. Her face was chapped, raw, lips, cracked hair frozen in wild strands across her cheeks. Her feet bare, swollen and purple toes bleeding onto the snow, and she was crawling toward him. Please, please don't leave, her voice was more breath than sound. Silas dropped to his knees without thinking. Hey! Hey, it's all right. She lunged the last few inches and clutched his boot, sobbing into the worn leather. My mama, she gasped. She won't wake up. I tried everybody. They all slammed their doors. I didn't know what else to do. Please don't ride away. If you ride away, she's gonna die. He reached down and touched her shoulder gently, prying her off his boot. What's your name, Nessa? Nessa Talakai. All right, Nessa. He looked at her feet, her hands, the frantic rise and fall of her chest. She should be dead already from the cold. She was shaking so hard he thought her bones might snap. Where's your mama cabin? She whispered. Just a little ways, I think. He stared at her a moment longer. If he walked away, she'd die right here in this storm. Her mother, wherever she was, wouldn't last much longer. He lifted her easily. She weighed less than a sack of flour and carried her back to Copper. The horse's eyes widened slightly at the sight, but he didn't flinch. Silas wrapped her in his saddle blanket, tucked her against the horn, then climbed up behind her. Her head sagged back against his chest, like she'd just run 100 miles. You're lucky I ain't who I used to be, he muttered. She didn't respond. They rode west, the snow thickening into a white sheet of silence. He kept one arm around her and the other on the reins. After a few minutes, he felt her stir again. Are you a good man, mister? The question stabbed him like a hot brand. 4 years ago, maybe. Once before Kansas, before the birthing bed soaked in blood, before the coffin-lidded silence that swallowed everything. I'm trying, he said finally. That good enough for now? Nessa was quiet a long time. I reckon it'll have to be. They didn't speak after that. The storm made talking difficult. The land fell away into shallow canyons and gullies. The sun vanished behind bruised clouds. He watched the trail for signs of a homestead wood, smoke a fence, a chicken coop. Nothing. Then Nessa pointed with a trembling hand. There. Just there. They followed the narrow cut between two bluffs and into a shallow basin. The cabin was a sagging patchwork of adobe and pine planks, one side propped with old boards, the roof patched with oilcloth. No smoke, no light. The door hung loose on one hinge. He slid down and lifted Nessa, gently setting her on the porch. "Stay here. I ain't leaving her again," she said, chin lifting despite her tears. He nodded and pushed open the door. The smell hit first sickness, and sweat, stale air, soaked quilts left too long in the cold. The room was dim, lit only by the light bleeding in through slats in the wall. A shape stirred in the bed against the back wall. She was maybe 35. Red hair stuck to her forehead with fever, her skin flushed, red eyes rolling beneath half-lidded lashes. Nessa bolted past him, dropping to her knees beside the bed. "Mama? Mama, I brought someone. He's gonna help." The woman's lips moved, but the words didn't make sense. Silas stepped closer, knelt beside the cot. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open and landed on him. "You come for her," she rasped. "No, ma'am, your girl found me?" She closed her eyes and whispered, "We can't pay. Nobody's asking for money." He reached for the pitcher on the side table. Empty. Quilts soaked with sweat. Her pulse was weak and thready. Fever high enough to kill. She'd need water-fire dry clothes, immediately. He looked at Nessa. "You know where the well is behind the cabin. My papa, he dug it last spring." "Good. Start a fire." "Can you do that?" She nodded fiercely. "I've been doing fires since I was 6. That's what I need. Wood first, then fire. Then show me where to find buckets." As she moved, limping and determined, Silas turned back to the woman on the bed. Her breathing was shallow. Her skin was burning. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she'd make it through the night. But he knew one thing: he wasn't leaving. Not this time. Not again. Mr. Yazzie said we owed too much, the preacher said God would provide, and the ranchers said we weren't their kin. Nessa's voice was flat, her eyes fixed on the fire that now sputtered and popped inside the stone hearth. The light flickered across her face, illuminating the raw edges of windburn and quiet hurt that didn't belong on a child. Her hands trembled as she fed in more kindling, but it wasn't just the cold. It was something deeper, colder. Silas crouched beside her, feeding thicker branches into the flame. Heat crept slowly into the cabin, licking the frost off the windows. Behind them, Leia stirred, caught somewhere between dreams and fevered murmurs. Her breathing rasped like torn fabric. She walked to every house she could think of. Nessa muttered, as if trying to convince herself of something. First was Pastor Ridgely. Mama said once he was a man of God. But when I knocked, his wife opened the door a crack and said he was sick and couldn't come out. I heard him coughing inside, but I don't think it was real. Silas said nothing. He kept his eyes on the fire. Then I went to Mr. Yazzie's store. He looked me straight in the face and said, "You still owe me for last winter. I'm no charity." I told him Mama was dying. He said it ain't his problem if she don't pay her debts. Silas's jaw clenched. Nessa added, barely audible, "I wasn't asking for money. Just medicine." She stopped, hugging her arms around herself, eyes tracking the firelight, like it was the only thing anchoring her. I walked to the Thorpe ranch after that. Mr. Thorpe told me he was too busy getting ready for the storm. Said I should go home before my kind brought sickness to their livestock. Silas finally spoke, voice low and steady. You walked to all those places, Nessa nodded once. All morning. My feet started bleeding by the time I got to the church road. But I thought if I knocked long enough, someone'd care. She looked up, then her brown eyes gleaming with something older than her years. They didn't. Not one of them. Silas sat back on his heels, absorbing it. The names were familiar. He'd passed through Cedar Bluff a few years back. Folks hadn't seemed cruel then. Just tired. Guarded. The way people got when they believed survival was something to be hoarded. He stood and crossed to the bed. Leia's face glistened with sweat. He soaked a rag from the fresh bucket Nessa had fetched and pressed it gently to her brow. She didn't flinch, but her lips moved. Sam. It's cold. Not Sam, Silas murmured. Name's Silas Cohen. Your daughter found me on the trail. Leia's lips parted again, but the words that came out were garbled. Her fingers twitched against the blanket, then stilled. Silas glanced over his shoulder. You said your father dug the well. Nessa nodded, now wrapped in the spare blanket he'd dried near the fire. He was fixing the corral fence for Mr. Yazzie last spring. Horse spooked. Threw him right into a cedar post. She swallowed hard. He never woke up. Dr. Thorne said he broke his neck. Quick, at least. How long's it been? 8 months. Her voice faltered. Mama kept us going. She made things stretch, grew beans and squash, traded dried corn for cloth with Miss Marla. When her ankle gave out hauling water, everything got harder. Silas remembered Miss Marla Yazzie, a Navajo widow who traded herbs and healing salves. She lived in a stone house at the edge of the ridge, one of the few in town who walked between the native families and the settlers without apology. She ever try the doctor again? Nessa nodded slowly. Once. He came when she twisted her ankle, said he'd add it to our account, but he told her next time there'd have to be payment up front. Dr. Ezra Thorne. Yeah, he's got a shingle out front of his house that says physician and surgeon. But he won't treat us anymore. Silas dipped the rag again and touched it to Leia's neck, then to her wrists. She's not going to make it without medicine, he said aloud, more to himself than to Nessa. Not just water and snowpacks. Not at this fever. He stood. The fire crackled louder now, dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind had slowed, but the snow kept falling in thick sheets. Still, it would take the better part of the day to ride to town and back, and no guarantee the doctor would come. Not for free. You think he'll say no? Nessa asked quietly. Silas looked at her, this girl with bandaged feet and ash-smudged cheeks, and hated that she even had to ask. I think he said I won't give him the option. He moved to the corner of the room where his saddlebags lay, dug through them and pulled out a small leather pouch. Coins clinked softly. Not much left, just under $40, the last of a bounty payout from a town far east of here. It might not be enough. He glanced back at the bed. Leia moaned softly, her lips moving again in a fevered whisper. Mama thinks I'm her sister sometimes, Nessa said suddenly. She calls me Ruth. That's who she talks to when she's not really awake. Silas nodded. She loved her real deep. Said they used to braid each other's hair and read books by candlelight. Ruth died of scarlet fever. When Mama gets sick, she sees her. The girl's voice cracked on that last sentence. She sees the dead, but she don't see me. Silas crossed the room and crouched down beside her again. She sees you, he said. She's fighting for you. Her body just ain't caught up yet. Nessa didn't answer, but her eyes flicked toward her mother, hope blooming there like something too fragile to touch. He stood. I'll leave first light. If the storm lets up, I can reach Cedar Bluff by midday. I'll bring Thorn back myself if I have to. You really think he'll help? Silas didn't lie. I think I'll make him. Nessa nodded. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and turned back toward the fire. Silas returned to Leia's side. Her breath rattled. The fire gave a little sigh and collapsed inward, as if it too was tired. He sat beside her, rag in hand, listening to the storm press against the thin cabin walls. In the silence, he heard her whisper one word: stay. He already had, and tomorrow, if he had to walk through every snow-covered mile between here and the doctor's porch, he would. Because there was no one else. Because no one else had. They shut their doors before I could finish asking, like my words might infect them. The wind clawed at Silas's coat as he stepped out into the snow-covered yard, leather boots sinking deep into the white crust. He had tied his satchel across his chest and double-checked the revolver at his hip. The cold bit through his layers like needles, but the urgency burning inside him made it tolerable. Barely. Behind him, the door of the cabin creaked closed. Nessa stood watching, her arms hugged tight around herself beneath the oversized shawl he'd left behind. You sure you can manage the fire and her both? He called over the wind. She nodded hard. I've done harder things than stoking logs. There was no boast in her voice. Just fact. Silas gave her a small nod, then whistled for his horse. Juniper came trotting through the drifts from where she'd been tied under the old awning mane crusted with snow. He mounted and cast one more look at the cabin. Smoke curled steadily from the chimney, a defiant ribbon in the gray sky. The ride to Cedar Bluff took longer than he'd hoped. Snowdrifts had swallowed whole sections of the trail, and twice he had to dismount and lead Juniper through waist-high powder. The trees groaned beneath the weight of the storm's remnants. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, a lonesome sound swallowed quickly by wind. By the time the church steeple came into view through the falling snow, his legs were half numb and his hands stiff. The town, usually quiet, now felt still in an unnatural way. Curtains drawn, doors latched. He rode straight to Dr. Ezra Thorne's house. It was a modest 2-story with green shutters and a wide porch dusted in snow. A sign above the door read, "Doctor." By appointment only. Silas stepped down, boots crunching, and rapped sharply. A moment passed, then 2. Finally, the door opened just a sliver. Dr. Thorne, lean and pale, peered out with suspicion. "Yes, I need you to come with me," Silas said plainly. "There's a woman sick with fever, high, weak pulse, rattled lungs." The doctor blinked. "And who are you?" "Silas Cohen. Just passing through. I found her near frozen in the snow. Her daughter brought me to their cabin. She's burning up." Dr. Thorne's face hardened. "If it's Leia Ironhorse, I've been out there before. I warned them not to delay care. They've built up too much debt. My ledger's not a charity. She won't last another night. She should have thought of that before ignoring treatment plans and payments." Silas reached into his coat, pulled out the pouch, and rattled it. "This is $40. Take it or come get the rest when she wakes and earns it." Thorne hesitated. "It might not cover what's needed." "Then tell me what does. But if she dies because you refuse to ride, I'll let everyone from here to Bisbee know it was you who stood by and watched." Their eyes locked. Silas didn't blink. Thorne finally sighed. "Give me 5 minutes. I'll gather my things." As Silas waited, a woman stepped onto the porch of the house next door. Small framed shawl tight around her shoulders with weathered eyes that studied him like she'd seen men like him before. "You're wasting your coin," she said softly. "He'll help her, but he'll make sure you pay twice before it's over." "Doesn't matter," Silas replied. "Is it Leia and her little girl?" He turned. You know them, I know enough. Her husband was kind. Fixed my fence 2 winters ago before he passed. The woman paused. My name's Nomi. If you need broth or help later, I'll come. Silas gave her a grateful nod, then turned as Thorn re-emerged with a satchel slung over his shoulder and a wool scarf looped around his neck. Let's go, the doctor said stiffly. They rode hard, the wind rising behind them again. Clouds pressed low. The hush of coming snow filled the woods like held breath. By the time they reached the cabin, night was edging in. Light flickered in the windows and smoke still rose faithful and thin from the chimney. Nessa opened the door before they could knock. She's worse, she said quickly. She started shaking a little and then went still. I didn't know what to do. Dr. Thorne pushed past, dropping to his knees beside Leia. His hands moved with practiced speed, checking her pulse, feeling her forehead, examining her breath. She's in the danger curve, he muttered. Could be pneumonia, fever's climbing too fast. He rummaged through his satchel and pulled out a small bottle of liquid, unstoppered it, and poured it into a tin cup. He gently lifted Leia's head and eased the liquid into her mouth a drop at a time. Silas stood near the hearth, watching every move, hands clenched. Thorne began mixing a powder into water, murmuring as he worked. If this breaks the fever overnight, she might have a fighting chance. She will, Nessa said quietly, crouching beside her mother. She always does. She won't if the fire goes out or her body can't sweat this out, the doctor replied. Keep her warm, but not smothered. Water at her lips every hour. Watch her breathing. If it rattles more, I'll need to drain fluid. I'll stay, Silas said. No, Thorne shook his head. You'll rest. You've done enough. The girl knows what to do. Silas looked to Nessa. She gave a little nod. There was no fear left in her face, only purpose. As the doctor packed his tools and stood, Silas pulled him aside. If she pulls through, I expect you to keep your word. You paid, Thorne said simply. I did the job. No more, no less. You did the job because I didn't give you a choice. The doctor didn't argue. He left into the cold. Silas remained by the door, hand resting on the knob, unsure what would come next. Nessa spoke from beside the bed. When I asked folks to help us, they acted like I was invisible. But I wasn't. I was just inconvenient. Her voice didn't tremble. Silas crossed the room slowly, took a seat beside her, and looked down at Leia's sleeping face. You're not invisible now, he said. And you never were to her. The fire hissed low, and outside snow began to fall again, soft as ashes. Inside they kept watch. She's not gone yet, but we're going to have to fight like hell if she's going to stay. Silas didn't sleep. He kept the fire going, adding split logs in steady rhythm, the orange light casting long shadows that danced across the cabin walls. Every now and then, Leia groaned in her sleep or slipped into silence so complete it stole his breath. Nessa never left her side. She cradled her mother's hand and pressed cool cloths to her forehead, whispering small things that sounded like prayers, though she never called them that. At some point before dawn, Silas brewed coffee thick and black, its bitterness grounding him as the wind howled outside. He'd seen men survive bullet wounds and fall to fevers. It always struck him how death waited quietly when it came this way. No drama, just a slow vanishing. But Leia hadn't vanished yet. Her breathing was shallower now, but less rattled. That had to mean something. Silas glanced at Nessa, her chin resting against the edge of the mattress, eyes half closed in exhaustion. He moved quietly, laying a blanket over her shoulders. She didn't stir. As the first gray light touched the horizon, hoofbeats approached from the trees. He stepped outside into the frigid morning and found a man on horseback approaching from the trail. Stocky, heavy-set, with a thick black braid and a weathered felt hat, he rode with a hunter's confidence. "Morning," the man called. "You Silas Cohen I am. Name's Cody Tallbird." Nomi sent word. He swung down from his horse and opened his saddlebag. "She said you might need broth herbs, maybe more. I brought what we could." Silas opened the door wider. "She's still alive, but she's weak." Cody nodded and stepped inside, warm air curling around him. He crouched by Leia's side, watching her breathe, then turned to Nessa. "You the one who came into town asking for help?" Nessa blinked the sleep away and sat up straighter. "Yes, sir." He smiled gently. "You did good, kid. She's still here because of you." Nessa's lip trembled, but she nodded. Silas could see the weight she carried, older than her years, stitched into her spine like it had been sewn in since birth. Cody pulled out several bundles wrapped in cloth, dried roots, herbs, and a small pouch of bone broth powder. "I'll show you how to mix this for her. You give it to her warm, keep her sipping when she can. The herbs will help the lungs." They got to work. Silas boiled water over the fire, stirred in the powder until it thickened, and added the herb mixture Cody prepared. The air filled with a sharp, earthy aroma. As the day crawled on, Leia stirred more. She coughed weak and hollow, but it was the first full sound she'd made in nearly a day. Her eyelids fluttered, and once she whispered Nessa's name. "She's not gone yet," Cody said again, firmer this time. "But we're going to have to fight like hell if she's going to stay." Later, while Nessa dozed and Cody stepped outside to tend his horse, Silas sat beside Leia. He studied her face, sharp cheekbones, chapped lips, sweat beading along her hairline. She was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 30, maybe not even. His voice was low. "You don't know me, but I'm here because of your daughter. That girl walked barefoot through a blizzard to save you. That kind of love doesn't deserve to go unanswered. So don't you dare slip away while she's sleeping." Her brow twitched, as if she heard him. By the afternoon, the weather turned. The sky bruised over with clouds and wind beat against the shutters. Snow returned thick and unrelenting. Inside, warmth clung to the cabin like a stubborn ghost. Silas kept feeding the fire. Cody sat by the window carving a piece of driftwood with a pocket knife. He didn't say much, but when he did, it mattered. "You served somewhere?" Cody asked, not looking up. "Lawman, Arizona Territory." Cody nodded. "Thought I saw that set to your jaw. You don't look like a drifter. You look like someone who used to belong somewhere." Silas didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames. "I buried my wife and son 3 winters ago. After that, nowhere felt right." "I'm sorry," Cody said simply. "Me too." They didn't say much more. That night, Nessa woke to her mother's voice, thin, cracked, but real. "Baby. Water." She scrambled forward, cradling Leia's head and tipping the tin cup to her lips. Leia drank only a little, but enough to draw tears from Nessa's eyes. "She's awake," she whispered, looking to Silas. "She's really awake." Silas didn't trust his voice, so he just nodded, chest tight. Cody leaned forward and touched Leia's forehead. "Fever's breaking. Not gone, but breaking." Leia turned her head slowly. Her eyes settled on Silas. "You're not the doctor." "No," Silas said gently. "Just the one who answered the knock." Her gaze flicked to Nessa, then back to him. "Thank you." Silas stood suddenly restless. "I'll get more wood." Outside, the storm raged again, but this time it didn't feel like a threat. Just the land reminding them who it was. He split wood beneath the overhang, breath coming in white puffs. When he returned inside, the light had changed. The cabin no longer felt like a shelter from death. It felt like a place where life had decided to stay. Nomi arrived not long after sunset, wrapped in a heavy shawl, cheeks red from the cold. She carried a small pot of stew and a fresh blanket. "I heard she made it through the fever," she said, her voice both hope and caution. "She's not out of the woods yet," Cody replied, "but she's facing the right direction." Nomi knelt beside Leia and pressed a palm gently to her cheek. "You stubborn woman," she murmured. "Even now you can't do anything easy." Leia smiled faintly. Never did. They shared a look, a quiet understanding between women who had seen hardship wear down pride and still chose to keep going. As the firelight danced across the log walls, Nessa curled up at her mother's side, her hand still wrapped around Leia's. Silas leaned against the doorframe and stared into the flames. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he wasn't planning to leave by sunrise. The storm outside howled on, but the cabin was still. And inside that stillness, something new had taken root. She's not broken. She's bruised and bone-weary, but there's a fight in her still. You can see it when she opens her eyes. Leia stirred under the patchwork quilt, her face pale but no longer drenched in fever sweat. Her lashes fluttered and her brow creased as if the world were too loud or too bright. Silas, who had been quietly shaving curls of kindling by the hearth, looked up when he heard her voice, hoarse, cracked but alive. "Where's Nessa?" she whispered. "Right here, Mama." Nessa moved to her side, her hand finding Leia's. "You scared me." Leia turned her head slowly, studying her daughter's face. "You walked into town, alone in the snow," Nessa said proudly, "and I brought help." Leia shifted her gaze to Silas. "You stayed. I wasn't about to walk away after your daughter knocked on my chest like a thunderclap." Her lips quirked upward, though it faded quickly under the weight of exhaustion. "Then I owe you." "No, ma'am. You don't owe me a thing. We're not tallying debts here." Cody, sitting by the stove, stirred a pot of warm broth and looked over his shoulder. "She'll need a few more days at least before she's on her feet. Maybe more." But that fever broke clean. Leia's eyes drifted shut again, and for a moment, the cabin settled into a rare stillness, broken only by the steady boil of broth and the occasional crack of a log in the fire. Later, Nomi arrived with folded clothes, a sack of root vegetables, and an envelope with 3 worn bills inside. "It's not much," she said, handing it to Silas. "But I took up a little collection. Not everyone in Cedar Bluff is cold-hearted." Silas took the envelope but didn't open it. "You didn't have to do this." "We did." Nomi's voice was firm. "People feel guilty. They turn their backs on a girl knocking in the snow. Some of them want a chance to do better." He met her gaze and nodded. "Then let them." That afternoon, as snow melted in rivulets from the eaves and the wind calmed to a hush, Leia managed to sit up with Silas's help. She wore a thick flannel shirt Cody had lent her and a shawl from Nomi's pack. Nessa perched beside her, proud and protective. "You've got quite a daughter," Silas said, handing Leia a mug of tea. "I know it." Leia's hands trembled slightly as she took it. "She's more courage than years. You raised her well, I tried." Her voice cracked and she looked away toward the frost-laced window. "We had a life before my husband died. Jay built this cabin with his hands. Grew up in these hills, knew every tree and trail. He'd haul timber by mule barter with traders down by the river. When he passed, folks offered condolences for about a week. Then the quiet came." Nessa lowered her eyes as if remembering too well. "We had nothing left." Leia continued. "No money, no kin close enough to call. The town didn't want a widow and a half-starved girl bringing down their good name. They didn't just shut you out," Silas said, tone low. "They pretended you disappeared." Leia looked up, tired but steady. "But you didn't." Cody cleared his throat and stood. Nomi and I can help with some repairs. I noticed the roof line sagging at the rear. Maybe I can haul in new boards from Dead Horse Ridge. You don't have to, Leia started. He held up a hand. You don't have to accept help with shame. You lived through what many wouldn't. That's strength. Let others carry a bit now. Silas stood and stepped outside. The air smelled of wet pine and thawing earth. He walked to the woodpile, stacked more logs in his arms, and stared at the trees beyond. When he turned back, he found Leia leaning on the doorway, wrapped in her shawl. You shouldn't be up, only for a moment. She came to stand beside him, watching the forest. The silence between them was heavier now, not uncomfortable, but thick with questions left unspoken. You look like someone who's lost something too, she said softly. Silas didn't reply right away. My wife. My boy. Wagon flipped on black ice 3 winters back. I was late getting home. If I'd left an hour sooner, you'd still be blaming yourself. He met her eyes. I do. And still you stayed. That matters, Silas. They stood in silence again, this time closer. Inside, Nessa and Cody laughed over something soft and real. I don't know what comes next. Leia admitted, voice thin. I don't even know if I have enough food for a week. You've got help now, Silas replied. Not just scraps and pity. Real help. And you, I haven't stayed anywhere this long in years. He paused. But maybe it's time I did. Leia looked away, then back. You don't owe us anything. I don't stay out of duty. She studied him, the strength still flickering behind her weariness. The next morning, Silas woke to find the fire already stoked, and Nessa sitting cross-legged on the floor, carving something with a dull blade. What's that? He asked. It's a whistle, she said. Mama used to say everyone needs something to call for help. Just in case. He sat beside her, nodding. Smart woman she is, Nessa said proudly. Leia managed more strength that day. She walked slowly, with Silas's help, sat at the table to sip stew. Her voice returned in fits and starts, and though her hands still shook, her eyes were steady. By evening, Nomi returned again, this time not alone. Behind her stood an older man with a heavy limp and a weathered Stetson. This is Otis, she said. He's offered to lend some lumber and tools. Says he's been waiting for a reason to swing a hammer again. Otis tipped his hat. If you don't mind a crooked shed and a straight roof, I'm your man. The cabin filled with a quiet sort of light that night, not from the hearth, but from something warmer. Nessa fell asleep, curled against her mother's side. Leia's arm wrapped protectively around her. Silas sat nearby, watching the snowflakes drift past the window, soft as feathers. He didn't know what this place would become. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't looking for the next trail out. He was watching the roots take hold. And for a man who thought he had nothing left, that was everything. Folks in this town don't mind turning their backs, but they'll sure twist a knife once yours is turned. The sun hadn't climbed far over the tree line when the knock came. Silas had just finished hitching the buckskin mule Nomi brought to help carry timber, when Otis opened the cabin door with a look that made the morning colder. Sheriff's outside, Otis muttered. Silas wiped his hands on his coat and stepped down from the porch. Sure enough, a tall man with a star pinned to his chest sat on a dark bay mare at the edge of the clearing. Deputy Hale Carr Silas remembered him. Young, all brim and no depth, but eager to prove something. The kind of man who mistook cruelty for justice. Hale dismounted with a smug tilt to his jaw. Heard you've been making house calls out here, Cohen. Just lending a hand, Silas said. Didn't know helping a sick woman was against the law in Cedar Bluff. Hale didn't smile. This woman you're helping, Leia Ironhorse, she still owes fees to the county clinic. Failed to respond to notices. She was unconscious with a fever. "That your version of dodging paperwork, I don't make the rules," Hale said. "She's on township land. Technically, she's squatting now that her husband's been dead over a year, and the council's reviewing all homestead claims not properly transferred." Silas stepped closer, voice calm but firm. This land was theirs, built with their hands. Nobody else's. Well, a few folks in town disagree. Some say a mother and child out here sick and unattended, it's dangerous. Might bring illness into town. Might give outsiders the wrong idea about how we care for our own. "I see," Silas said, folding his arms. "So first they turn her away, and now they're worried she makes them look bad." Hale adjusted his gloves. "I'm just delivering the message she needs to settle her debts, prove rightful claim, or vacate by week's end." "She's barely walking," Otis growled from the porch. "That your version of mercy? Now I'm just doing my job," Hale replied, then mounted again. "Let her know the clock's ticking." He rode off, slow, deliberate, like he wanted his tracks to leave scars. Silas stood still long after the horse vanished behind the trees. Leah had been upright for maybe 2 days, eating soft bread and warm broth, her body still weak, but her mind clear. And now this. He went back inside, boots heavy. Leah sat near the hearth, eyes alert the moment she saw his face. "What is it?" He told her everything: Hale's visit, the eviction threat, the debt. She didn't flinch, just closed her eyes for a long moment. "I figured it was coming. They've been sniffing around since Jay passed. Didn't even wait for the frost to clear before trying to reclaim what he built." "We'll find a way," Silas said. "I've got nothing left," she said quietly. "No money, no deed. Just that he was born here and cleared this land with his own hands. That's something," Nomi said, entering behind him. She pulled off her gloves and moved to kneel beside Leah. "Jay's parents filed the original claim. I remember the stamp. My brother used to help them haul hay. There might still be a copy in the records." Leah shook her head. "The courthouse burned down 5 years ago. Then we'll go to the tribal records," Nomi said. "We'll dig up what they don't want found." Otis came in behind her, carrying a roll of tools. "And if they want her gone by week's end, then we build faster, stronger. They won't be able to call this place broken or unfit." Cody showed up just before noon with a crate of nails, 3 lengths of new timber, and news from town. "They've already whispered to the preacher," he said. "Trying to paint you all like trouble. One of the shopkeepers said Hale's planning to come back with more than words next time." Leah's eyes blazed for a moment. Of course they'll use the law. That's what cowards do when their pride gets bruised. "Then we don't give them an inch," Silas said. "We fix the cabin. We show them strength, not pity. You're not alone anymore." She looked at him, something shifting deep behind her tired expression. "You sure you're not just running from something too?" "I was," he answered. "Now I'm standing still for once. And I think I was meant to stand here." Outside, they worked until the sky turned orange. Otis hammered planks into place. Cody lifted new boards for the porch beams, and Silas dug out a drainage trench where ice had warped the rear foundation. Inside, Nomi helped Leah sit upright for longer stretches, massaged her shoulders, and began teaching Nessa how to sew stronger seams in the worn blankets. The cabin was no longer just surviving, it was rebuilding. That night, over soup thick with elk meat and wild carrots, Leah sat straighter than she had in days. "They're not going to stop," she said. "You know that, right? They're scared someone might see this place and realize they were wrong." Silas nodded. "Let them come. We'll greet them with proof, with witness, and with a home that speaks for itself." She smiled faintly. "Jay used to say you don't have to raise your voice when you've already built something that can speak louder." I like that. Before bed, Silas stepped out onto the porch. The wind had calmed, but the cold was still sharp in the lungs. Stars spread like frost across the sky. Behind him, he could hear Nessa humming a quiet tune, half lullaby, half prayer. He looked out at the trees, hands resting on the rail. He didn't know how this fight would end, but he knew something had changed in him. Something solid had taken root even deeper than duty. He felt it when Leia looked at him with defiance, when Nessa tugged at his sleeve to show him the whistle she'd carved, when Otis grumbled about misaligned nails but still kept hammering. This place wasn't just a cabin in the woods anymore. It was becoming a stand, a promise, a home, and he was part of it now, whether the town liked it or not. He didn't just knock once he pounded until the door shook, like he wanted fear to answer instead of a person. The knock came just after breakfast, sharp and angry. Leia had just managed to take her first few steps from the bed without leaning on Nomi. Her fingers gripped the doorframe for balance when the sound struck 3 booming hits, loud enough to rattle the crockery. Silas stood instantly, his instincts older than his grief. His hand dropped to the handle of the revolver holstered near the coat rack. Otis was already halfway across the room, pipe clenched between his teeth. Nessa pressed herself to Leia's side, face tense. The door groaned open under Silas's hand. Deputy Hale stood there, cheeks flushed red, not from the cold. Behind him, 2 town councilmen and a man in a brown overcoat hovered near the edge of the yard. All 3 held leather folders like they were weapons. "I warned you," Hale said, stepping forward. "You had a week. It's been 8 days." Silas didn't move from the threshold. "She's recovering. And she hasn't moved because she nearly died. You knew that when you first showed up." "I know she's still here," Hale barked. "And I know the claim wasn't renewed after Jay Ironhorse's death. That means this family is still in their home," Leia said behind Silas' voice, hoarse but cutting through like a knife. She stepped forward, arms bracing the frame behind her spine, tall. This land was cleared by Ironhorse hands, timber felled by Jay walls raised by kin. "My daughter was born here under that roof." She pointed toward the rafters. "You think a few faded signatures are more real than that?" Hale opened his mouth, but Nomi appeared behind Leia holding a folded document. "Actually," Nomi said, calm and defiant, "we have something you missed." She passed it to the councilman in the brown overcoat. "Filed with the tribal council in 1879, recorded by Jay's grandfather. His great-granddaughter is standing here now." The man flipped through it, squinting as if confused. "But this isn't in the county books." "That's because you didn't ask the right people," Cody said, approaching from the side with a bucket of kindling. "But it's real, recognized by the tribal land council. That makes it valid." Silas watched the color drain from Hale's face, his authority shrinking behind paper he couldn't twist. "This doesn't settle the clinic debt," Hale muttered, "nor the issue of sanitation or safety. The council's worried about risk. We just rebuilt the support beams, shored the rear wall, and laid new drainage," Otis said, stepping forward with mud still on his boots. "This cabin's safer than the butcher shop down on 5th. "And the debt?" the second councilman asked. Silas turned toward the hearth, pulled a folded bundle from under the teapot lid, and held it out. "Collected from folks who care. The clinic's full payment. Even a bit over." The man took it, surprised. "You wanted her gone," Silas said, eyes on Hale. "Because she made your town look bad. Because her suffering reminded people that neighborly pride doesn't mean a thing if it folds at the first sign of need." Leia's voice came again, quieter now. "I won't forget the doors that stayed closed. But I'll remember the ones that opened louder." The wind shifted, brushing through the trees. A chickadee called somewhere nearby, soft and bright. For a moment, no one spoke. The councilman in brown finally folded the document and handed it back to Nomi. It seems your claim is valid. The matter is closed as far as the town is concerned. The others didn't protest. Hale gave one last look, more spite than retreat, before tipping his hat stiffly and walking off without a word. The cabin door shut behind them with a quiet finality, the kind of silence that feels earned. Inside, no one moved for a long breath. Then Nessa turned to her mother, her small face glowing with something more than relief. "We won, Mama." Leia's knees buckled slightly, and she reached for the nearest chair. Silas was there first, helping her down. "It's not just winning," she whispered. "It's still having a place to wake up tomorrow." Otis chuckled softly and tugged his suspenders. "And a porch that don't lean no more." Leia looked around at the faces, Nomi, Cody, Otis, Silas, and something welled behind her eyes that she blinked away before it spilled. That afternoon, Nomi heated a big pot of rabbit stew, and Cody split more wood than they needed, saying the surplus might be useful just in case. Silas trimmed the last of the warped shutters, smoothing them with sandpaper until they fit flush against the cabin wall. Leia rested, watching through the window as her daughter helped Otis carry tools back to the shed. Her smile was small, but it lingered. "I thought we were forgotten," she murmured. Silas sat beside her on the bench. "So did I." She turned her head toward him, studying the worn lines of his face. "But you weren't. You showed up." "So did you," he said. "You lived. That matters." Nessa came in not long after, cheeks, red eyes bright. "Otis says I got a strong back," she announced. "He's not wrong," Silas replied. "And you've got a sharper mind than most men twice your age." That night they lit 2 lanterns on the porch instead of 1. Nomi called it a sign, let the light show the way back for anyone else still lost. Leia stood for a few minutes beside Silas under the open stars. Her hair was tied back, and the color had returned to her face. She still leaned on a cane, but her legs were steadier. "I don't know what's next," she said. "We make it up as we go," he replied. She nodded. "But I think we're meant to stay." "And I think," Silas said softly this time, "I'm meant to stay too." She didn't speak again, but her silence was agreement enough. The woods stood watch. The house, repaired and lit, no longer sagged or whispered with abandonment. It breathed. It endured. And the ones inside it, they'd chosen to stay, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because something here was finally worth staying for. She asked me if home was a place or a person, and I didn't have an answer until she looked up at me like I was both. The morning came, slow, golden light slipping through the cracks in the shutters as steam rose from a pot of coffee on the stove. Leia moved with measured steadiness, now folding a threadbare towel with her good hand, while her cane leaned against the kitchen wall. Her body still ached, but her bones no longer screamed when she stood. The fever had loosened its grip, and what remained was a woman rebuilding her strength. Silas was on the porch, mending a loose hinge on the front step, when he heard the soft creak behind him. Nessa padded out barefoot, holding a slice of cornbread in one hand, the other wrapped around her whistle like it was a talisman. "You fixed the creak," she said, biting into the bread. "Almost," Silas replied, tightening the last screw. "Figured we could all use a quieter step or two." Nessa sat beside him, her feet dangling just above the dirt. "You gonna stay?" she asked, not looking at him. Silas paused, the screwdriver still in his hand. "I haven't figured that out yet." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she asked, "What was your home like?" He sat back and leaned against the post. "Big sky, wide land. My wife used to plant lilacs along the fence. My boy had a dog he named Bucket for no reason anyone could figure. I used to come home with my boots so dusty they left a trail on the porch. And there was always coffee waiting." Sounds like a place, it was Silas said. Then it wasn't. Nessa chewed slower, thoughtful. Mama said home ain't always wooden nails. Said sometimes it's just who lets you rest, without asking for pieces of you first. He looked down at her. She said that Nessa nodded. When Daddy passed. She said we'd build home again if we found the right people. And you think this is it I do now, she whispered. Her words landed deeper than he expected. He'd spent years roaming from bunkhouses to back roads, never unpacking more than a saddlebag. He didn't even know what was still in the bottom of it anymore. But here, between a girl's certainty and a woman's resilience, something like stillness had taken root. Inside, Leia was sorting herbs with Nomi when Cody arrived with a satchel over his shoulder. "Sheriff's not done," he said, dropping the bag near the door. "He's whispering in ears at the saloon. Said Silas is interfering with town matters. Might try to press charges for obstructing municipal authority." Leia's mouth tightened. And what exactly would that look like, helping a sick woman live, fixing a home they let rot? "Doesn't matter if it's legal or right," Cody said, rubbing his jaw. "Some folks don't like being made to feel wrong." Nomi crossed her arms. "Then maybe it's time someone reminded them wrong doesn't dissolve just because it's quiet." Cody turned to Silas, who'd stepped in behind him. "You ready for them to come knocking again? I've been ready since the first time they tried to push a woman off land she nearly died defending," he said. "You could still leave," Leia said, suddenly, eyes meeting his. "No shame in that. This isn't your fight." Silas looked at her, really looked. Pale skin, finally warming hands stained with sage, and ash eyes steady even after everything. "It became mine the second Nessa found me." He turned and walked outside, motioning for Cody and Otis to follow. They talked beneath the trees, low voices and serious faces. It wasn't about if a storm was coming. It was about when and how they'd hold the line. Back inside, Leia took Nessa's hand and squeezed it gently. "He's not like the others." "No," Nessa said. "He listens with his eyes, not just his ears." That afternoon, Silas saddled Juniper and rode into town. He moved with purpose, coat-buttoned hat low. People turned as he passed the man who stood with the widow who defied the deputy who stayed. He entered the general store first, picked up flour salt, 2 jars of molasses. When he paid, he laid down extra and said, for the next person too proud to ask. He stopped by the carpenter's shed next, bought nails and a new blade for the saw. By the time he reached the town square, the air had shifted. He felt it in the way folks avoided his eyes and how the shopkeeper next to the saloon turned her sign to closed, though the sun still hung high. He wasn't a ghost in this town anymore. He was a reminder of what they'd done and what they hadn't. When he returned to the cabin, the sun was dipping low. Leia was at the stove stirring a pot of beans, her movements slow but sure. Nessa carved a second whistle, this one smaller, shaped like a bird. They sat down for supper without ceremony, just the soft clatter of spoons, the creak of chairs, and the hush of gratitude that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Afterward, Leia stepped outside with Silas. The sky above them was deep purple stars beginning to bloom across its canvas. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For being the one who stayed. For not making us prove we were worth helping." He looked at her, the porch light flickering across her cheek. "You never had to prove a damn thing." She looked out toward the trees. She asked me if home was a place or a person, and I didn't have an answer. Silas's voice was quiet. "Do you now?" Leia turned and met his gaze. "I think it's whoever still sees you when the world stops looking." He didn't reply, just stepped closer, and together they watched the night settle like a blanket over the hills. Inside, Nessa placed both whistles side by side on the table. Different sizes, same purpose. She stared at them for a moment, then whispered, "I think we're safe now." The woods didn't answer, but for once, they didn't feel like they needed to. They didn't just want us quiet, they wanted us erased. But silence is a poor shield when truth is louder. The wind shifted that morning, blowing warm from the south and carrying the scent of damp pine and wet earth. It was the kind of day that whispered promises of thaw of new shoots beneath the frost. Silas stood at the edge of the clearing, sharpening a hatchet against the whetstone, while Otis adjusted the new hinges on the barn door. Leah emerged just after dawn, wrapped in her shawl. The illness had thinned her, but not broken her. The fire in her eyes burned steady now, no longer flickering. She held a sheet of parchment in her hand. "I want you to see something," she said to Silas. He followed her back inside the cabin where she unrolled the document on the table. It was old edges, curled corners, stained with time. "This is a copy of the land map," she said. "Jay kept it tucked behind the mantel. I didn't even remember it was there until last night." Silas studied it, hand-drawn lines, names written in faded ink. Her family's name stretched across the hillside. The land wasn't just claimed. It was lived, loved, and recorded. "That's what they're afraid of," he murmured. "Proof." Leah nodded. "The towns tried to scrub away what doesn't fit their ledger. But this says we were always here." A knock came just before noon. Not the kind that demanded just the soft rap of someone cautious. Cody stood on the porch, his hat in hand, face drawn. "You'd best come see," he said. Down in town, a notice had been posted to the church door and nailed to 2 fence posts along the main road. Each one bore the township seal and a headline public inquiry into land use and moral order in the eastern border. "They've painted it to sound like an issue of health," Cody said bitterly. "But it's targeted. Your name's not on it, but everyone knows who it's meant for." Silas read through the document in silence, jaw tight. A meeting. At the courthouse. 3 days from now. "They're calling it an inquiry," Nomi said, stepping beside him. "But it's a performance. They want to scare you into leaving." "They didn't just want us quiet," Leah said, voice low behind them. "They wanted us erased. But silence is a poor shield when truth is louder." Nessa, standing near the back, looked up at her mother. "Are we going to the meeting?" "We are," Leah said. "They'll lie," Otis muttered. "Twist every fact. Use fear and pride like a weapon." "Then we take something stronger," Leah replied. "Memory, proof, and every hand that helped rebuild this roof." Silas met her eyes. "If they want to talk morality, we'll show them what it actually looks like." That night, the cabin buzzed with purpose. Nomi brought ink and paper from her sewing kit. Cody dictated dates and names, while Leah recorded them: when Jay felled the first tree, when the cabin was finished, when Nessa was born. Otis produced receipts from old work trades, timber exchanged for roofing shingles, grain sacks swapped for nails. "None of it's legal currency," Otis said, "but it's the truth. It shows a life was lived here, in full." Silas brought down his own ledger tucked deep in his saddlebag. "I kept records too. Everywhere I've been, everyone I've helped. I wrote down the day Nessa found me, the day Leia's fever broke. They want to erase this, but I already wrote it down." In the corner, Nessa sat carving something small from a block of driftwood. She didn't say much, but her eyes stayed watchful, wide, and absorbing. The next morning, they walked into town as a group, Leah on Silas's arm, Nessa beside her, Otis and Cody close behind. Nomi led the way, braid hanging down her back, chin high. It was market day, and folks watched as they passed. Some turned their backs. Others stared, guilt etched on their faces. A few nodded almost shamefully, as if trying to make up for the silence that had allowed injustice to fester. The courthouse wasn't much, 2 rooms and a sagging roof, but it held power in name. Inside, the meeting had already begun. A row of townspeople sat in chairs along the right wall, heads cocked like crows waiting for a meal. Councilman Hayes sat at the front, with a stack of papers flanked by Deputy Hale, who wore his badge like armor. Silas stepped forward before they could speak. "We're not here for show," he said. "We're here because a line was drawn and we're tired of watching you move it to suit your comfort." Councilman Hayes cleared his throat. "This is a matter of public interest. The use of land near the eastern ridge, the safety of its inhabitants. I nearly died," Leah said, her voice cutting through. "And no one came. My daughter walked through a blizzard. She begged, and the doors stayed shut." A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone shifted guiltily. Someone else avoided her eyes. "But when we rebuilt," she continued, "when we stood back up, that's when you decided we were a threat. Not when we were dying, when we refused to disappear." Hayes fumbled with his papers. "This isn't personal." "Of course it is," Silas snapped. "Everything worth defending is." Nomi stepped forward and placed the map on the table. "This is the claim, and this is the family. You can twist your words. We'll keep telling the truth." Otis added the receipts. Cody laid out the herbs traded and the meals shared. Nessa moved quietly and placed her carved whistle on the table, smaller than the first, but with Leia's name etched into the side. "She carved this the night Mama got better," Silas said. "It was a reminder, if no one hears your voice, carve one loud enough they can't ignore." The room fell quiet. The weight of it all pressed down, not with anger, but with a truth so human no paper could refute it. Councilman Hayes looked out at the crowd. "We will review this and render a judgment at the week's end." Leah stepped back, her spine straight. "We've already judged you," she said. "We're still standing." They left without another word, the townspeople parting for them as they walked back into the sun. At the edge of the courthouse lawn, Silas paused and turned to Nessa. "What made you carve that whistle?" She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Because Mama said when you don't know who'll come, you make something that sounds like hope." He crouched and ruffled her hair gently. "You did more than that. You brought it." Behind them the town buzzed. But for the first time it buzzed quieter than the truth. They think justice is what you write down in books. But justice is how you answer when someone cries out in the dark. A cold wind cut through Cedar Bluff. The morning after the courthouse meeting, dry and sharp, the kind that rattled loose shutters and made people walk faster without realizing why. The cabin on the ridge stood firm against it, smoke curling from the chimney windows, glowing gold through the gray. Inside, Silas stirred a pot of barley, while Leah sat with Nomi at the table, quietly going over the copies of the land claim, again checking for anything they might have missed. They had 4 days before the council issued its final judgment. 4 days of waiting. 4 days of watching the town watch them back. Nessa sat cross-legged on the floor, carving something small with a pocket knife Otis had given her. She hadn't said much since the courthouse. She didn't need to. Her eyes saw everything. Silas poured a bowl and handed it to Leah. "Eat something." She gave him a small, grateful look. "You're fussing." "I've earned the right," he said. "Saved your life. Built your porch. Think that buys me at least 1 bowl of barley nagging." A breath of laughter escaped her, light and tired. Before long, Cody came up the ridge, breath fogging in the morning air. He didn't bother knocking, just stepped inside and said Hale's talking with some of the ranchers near the south fence line. "Rumor is he's drumming up talk of you stirring unrest." "Unrest," Leah said, voice hardening. "All we've done is survive, And that's the part they can't forgive, Nomi muttered. Silas leaned against the wall, arms folded. If Hale's trying to push fear, then he's counting on the town being more afraid of us than ashamed of themselves. Cody pulled off his gloves. And we're not helping if we just sit here waiting. I'm not waiting, Leia said, standing slowly. Her cane found the floor with a solid thump. We need to show them who we are, not who Hale says we are. I want to talk to the preacher. Silas blinked. You sure I'm not asking him to fix anything, she said. I'm asking him to remember the difference between a sermon and a silence. They rode into town that afternoon. Nomi and Cody flanked Leia like bookends of defiance. Silas walked beside Nessa, who carried her 2 carved whistles in her apron like relics. The preacher met them in front of the chapel, his white hair swept back, expression wary but not unkind. His hands shook slightly as he invited them in. They sat in the front pew while he remained standing near the altar. I've heard what you're facing, he began softly. And I'm praying the council comes to its senses. We don't need prayers, Leia said, gentle but firm. We need truth, spoken, not whispered. Remember when you visited after Jay's death, he nodded. You said God walks closest to the broken. But when I nearly died and my daughter begged strangers in the snow, nobody came. Not even you. The preacher's face crumpled slightly. Leia, I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because people trust your voice more than they trust mine. And you haven't used it. He looked down, then slowly stepped forward and took a seat across from her. I let fear speak louder than compassion. That was wrong. Nessa stepped forward and placed 1 whistle on the bench between them. I made this so people would listen. He picked it up slowly, running a thumb along the etched grooves. You remind me of someone, he said softly. A little girl once stood in this chapel with her father's hand in hers and asked me why some folks had to suffer more than others. What did you tell her? Silas asked. I told her suffering wasn't always fair, but ignoring it, that was a choice. Leia leaned forward. Then don't choose it again. He looked up. If I speak for you, I could lose people. You could also find your spine again, Nomi said sharply. The preacher exhaled, then nodded once. I'll speak at Sunday service. The council will hear it. So will everyone else. That evening back at the cabin, the air felt thinner, as if something invisible had been unclenched. Leia sat in the rocker while Nomi stirred soup. Silas trimmed fence rails outside under a sky bleeding orange at the edges. When he came in, Nessa looked up at him and asked, You think people can really change? He crouched beside her. Some can, and the others, they usually get real quiet when the truth starts speaking louder than them. She nodded thoughtfully, then whispered, Mama changed. She got strong again, he said. No, Nessa said. She remembered she was already strong. She just stopped hiding it. Silas looked at her for a long moment. You see more than most grown men you know, that Nessa grinned. Mama says my eyes don't lie. That night, Silas walked the ridge alone, his boots crunching lightly in the frost. He looked back toward the cabin, the light warm, the smoke rising steady. A home, not just a shelter. He thought of his wife and son, of the place he'd left behind, of the weight he carried in silence for too long. He whispered into the night, I stayed, and something in the wind whispered back almost like an answer. Good. Inside, Leia stood at the window watching him. She didn't call out, didn't interrupt, just watched. And knew that sometimes justice didn't come wearing badges or robes. Sometimes it came quietly, in a man who chose not to walk away, in a girl who refused to stop carving, in a mother who found her voice when the world tried to take it. Justice was answering the knock in the dark when no one else would. They didn't want to hear us, not really. But they couldn't ignore the sound of all of us standing together. The church bell rang low and slow across Cedar Bluff that Sunday morning. The kind of sound that usually called people to reflection or routine, but this time it called them to reckoning. Leia stood at the mirror, hands trembling slightly, as she buttoned her faded dress. Nomi helped her smooth the collar, then tied her shawl behind her shoulders. "You ready?" she asked softly. "I've been ready since the day they shut the door in Nessa's face." Silas waited just outside the cabin, hat in hand, eyes scanning the horizon like he was bracing for a gunfight. But instead of lead, it would be words. And he wasn't the only one holding his breath. Cody stood at the base of the path, boots polished, jaw set. Otis wore his best shirt and an old bolo tie he hadn't dusted off in a decade. And Nessa, proud and small, carried the whistle around her neck like a sheriff's badge. They walked together. Down the ridge, across the dirt road, past the places that had once shut their doors, and past the ones that had started leaving them ajar again. By the time they reached the chapel, a crowd had already gathered. Every pew was full. People stood in the aisles, spilled out the doors. Some looked ashamed. Some looked curious. And some looked like they still didn't understand why their world felt smaller with this family standing tall inside it. The preacher stood behind the pulpit, hands resting on the worn edge of the old wood. His face was pale but steady. When he spoke, the room hushed. "This town has built its pride on hard work, tradition, and faith," he began. "But sometimes pride can twist into silence, and silence can start to sound like consent." He looked up. When Leia Ironhorse fell ill, many of us said nothing. When her daughter came knocking, we turned away. Some out of fear, some out of apathy. But all of us bear the weight of that silence. The words dropped heavy into the room. No dramatics, just truth. In the book of Isaiah, he continued, it says, "Remove the heavy yoke of oppression. Stop pointing your finger and spreading vicious rumors. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness." A few heads bowed. A few hands clenched into fists in their laps. "I have failed in my duty as shepherd. I should have answered the knock first. And today I ask forgiveness not from God, but from the people we wronged." He stepped aside, and for a moment it seemed like the room might exhale and move on. But then Leia stood, with no paper in hand, no prepared speech, just her voice rough-edged but unshaken. "I don't need you to kneel," she said, eyes sweeping across the room. "I don't need flowers or charity or more apologies than action." She gestured to her daughter beside her. "I need you to remember that this child walked barefoot in the snow asking for help, and you closed your doors. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some didn't move at all. But I'm still here," Leia said. "And I'm not standing here because you made it easy. I'm standing here because I refused to disappear. Because my family's blood is in this land. Because we belong." Cody stepped forward, next voice slow and full of gravel. "You taught me how to split boards when I was 16, he said, pointing to a man in the second row. "And you sold me a cracked kettle without telling me when I was 20. So I figure between the two of you, we're even." A ripple of laughter, quiet but human. Nomi raised her hand. The council tried to bury the truth under paperwork, but we kept every scrap, every nail, every trade. She looked toward the front pew, and when Silas Cohen showed up, he didn't ask what color the door was. He just opened it. Silas said nothing. He didn't have to. By the end, even Hale, standing stiff at the back in uniform, looked smaller than before, less certain. The preacher stepped forward one last time. "The council will meet tomorrow. But this town already heard the verdict. And if anyone dares to say you don't belong, They'll have to explain why we let a child do what grown men wouldn't. They left the chapel in quiet waves. No shouts, no applause, just the slow, strange unraveling of pride, like old rope fraying at the edges. Outside, the wind had stilled. The sky had opened wide. Leia turned to Silas on the walk back. That felt harder than any fever. "But you did it," he said. She nodded. "Still doesn't mean they'll vote in our favor." "No," he agreed. "But they can't pretend anymore. They didn't want to hear us, not really. But they couldn't ignore the sound of all of us standing together." As they passed the general store, the clerk stepped out and handed Nessa a bundle of peppermint sticks. Said nothing, just a small nod. Near the blacksmith's, a rancher offered Otis a handshake. Said he had a gate that needed fixing. And as they climbed the ridge once more, Nessa stopped, turned, and let out a single long note from her whistle. Not loud, not shrill, just enough to float. And in the hush that followed it didn't echo back, because it had already been heard. They thought we were just noise in the wind, but wind shapes mountains and we're still standing. The council met just after sunrise. The courthouse doors stayed shut while the men inside whispered and debated, voices muffled behind pine walls that had seen more deals than justice. Outside, folks gathered not with torches or tempers, but with folded arms, steady feet, and faces lined by winter and waiting. Leia stood near the edge of the crowd, wrapped in her shawl cane planted like a flag beside her. Nomi flanked her left, Cody her right. Otis leaned on the fence rail with the patience of a man who had already endured more than men half his age. Silas stood close, his hat low, the revolver still holstered, but no longer hidden. Not because he expected a fight, but because sometimes presence was enough. Nessa sat on the steps, her legs tucked beneath her, and both whistles clutched in her palms. She didn't fidget, didn't speak, just watched. The door creaked open mid-morning. Councilman Hayes stepped out, shoulders stiff. He cleared his throat once, twice, then unrolled a scroll that looked too grand for what it likely held. "The Council of Cedar Bluff," he began, voice-taut, "has reviewed the claims of land use, heritage debt, and occupancy regarding the Iron Horse homestead." He paused, as if waiting for protest. There was none. "We find that the land deed, though not listed in county records, was properly filed through tribal channels and substantiated by community witness. We further acknowledge full payment of all outstanding medical debts now verified and recorded." Leia's fingers tightened on her cane. "The property will remain in the possession of Leia Ironhorse and her family," Hayes concluded. "The council formally recognizes her as legal steward of the homestead." A few scattered claps started, then stopped. People looked around, unsure. Celebration wasn't something this town knew how to do without guilt trailing behind it. Hale stood behind the doorframe, arms crossed. He said nothing, just stared. Hayes rolled the scroll back up and stepped down into the sunlight. "That concludes the matter." But Leia stepped forward before he could disappear. "No," she said. "Not yet." Silas didn't stop her, neither did Nomi. It wasn't their place to silence the woman who had already spent years speaking to a town that refused to listen. Leia's voice was quiet, but it didn't need to be loud. It had been forged in fire and winter, in abandonment and survival. "You wrote us off," she said. "When my husband died, you said condolences, then left us alone. When my daughter begged, you looked through her. When I nearly died, not one of you brought a single loaf of bread." No one interrupted. "I'm not asking for apologies. I'm not here for speeches. But let the record show we survived because we stood together. Not just my family, but the people who chose to answer." She gestured toward Cody, Nomi, Otis. toward Silas, and toward Nessa, who stood now, whistle around her neck, shining in the sun. "You can keep your ledgers," Leia said. "We've already written the part that matters." And then she turned her back on them. The others followed. Not with anger, not with triumph. Just a quiet dignity that could not be erased. By the time they reached the edge of town, a few hands had reached out small nods, quiet offers. A sack of flour left on a stoop, a jar of preserves pressed into Nomi's arms. No grand gestures, but maybe for Cedar Bluff it was a start. They made it home just before dusk. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The cabin stood sturdier than ever. That night they gathered around the table. No celebration, just bread soup and the kind of silence that came when a storm had passed and everything was still standing. Nomi raised her glass of cider. To the ones who stayed, Cody tapped his cup against hers. And to the girl who carved the truth into wood. Nessa blushed, but smiled. Leia looked at Silas, eyes softer now. "You could go," she said. "You've done enough." "I could," he replied. "But I think the road gave me up long before I gave it up." "So you're staying." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. "If there's still room." There always was. Outside, the wind picked up again high and low, brushing the treetops and curling against the windows. Nessa stood at the threshold looking out into the dark. "They thought we were just noise in the wind," she whispered. "But wind shapes mountains, and the mountains stood. Because they did. Together." The educational lesson drawn from this story is that real character is revealed not by what we say we value, but by how we respond when someone is vulnerable and asks for help. It reminds us that standing still, choosing to stay, to listen, and to act often matters more than grand gestures or loud opinions. The story also shows that community is not built by titles or rules, but by everyday courage, shared responsibility, and quiet kindness. In the later seasons of life, it gently affirms that dignity, purpose, and belonging are not behind us. They are renewed each time we choose compassion over comfort.